Okay, so NiV and helmet. Okay, non-invasive ventilation is a powerful tool in our hands and can avoid intubation in many, many patients. Today, when I started COPD, were half the patient in my ICU. Today, I can count the COPD that we intubate on a hand because we treat them often, even outside the ICU, because we start very early with non-invasive ventilation, and in most of the cases, they do very, very well. Okay, it works again. Perfect. However, there are, in spite of the development of many interesting devices for improving the applicability of this technique, still we may end up in severe problem, especially for those patients who need many hours every day. So the sickest the patient, the most probable the development of injuries. To overcome this problem, I think the first one was Massimo Antonelli or Cesare Gregoretti, but still this is Italian job. Try to use the helmet. The helmet, as you see, is like a grocer bag. I mean, something that might be very dangerous, but it's not. And at the beginning, the devices like these were extremely problematic. However, in the first study published in patients with hypoxemic acute respiratory failure, Massimo Antonelli showed that the complications related to NIV were significantly decreased, and that endotracheal intubation because of intolerance was zeroed, and the most important, that the hours of continuous NIV were significantly more than with a conventional oronasal mask. And you say, yeah, who cares? Well, those among you who treat sick patients with NIVs, so like, for instance, immunodepressed patient where you want to avoid as much as possible intubation, know that sometimes you have to keep going on for, days and days and days. Now, the helmet has advantages, clearly, and one of these advantages is that it doesn't touch the face in any part. However, because in its first form it was used using these bracelets under the axillas, you might end up in problems like this, just switching the point of friction on the skin. In addition, there are disadvantages compared to mask, which are summarized in this slide: an increased dead space, a reduced rate of pressurization, a less effectiveness in decreasing inspiratory effort, a worsened patient-ventilator interaction, and high rate of desynchrony. Regarding the first aspect, it's probably more a perceived problem. I mean, of course, there is some rebreathing. It's unavoidable. But the clinical relevance today, we believe, is much less than expected. And this is a very nice and very elegant study, even though I heard someone saying it was not as good as. I like it very much, proving that the effects in terms of that space are not as large as expected, and actually may depend a lot on the breathing pattern and the size of the patient. We know that in non-invasive ventilation, there are even more chances to develop asynchronies that in invasive ventilation, as nicely reported in this paper by Laurence Vigneault and the group in, at that time it was Genève and Paris, I don't know, maybe now it's Lausanne and Genève, anyway, Joliet, Brochard. And And indeed, when you use the helmet, you have huge delays, as indicated in this study that we performed on COPD patients. So you see a huge inspiratory trigger delay and pretty long expiratory trigger delay. Why this happens? Because, you know, if you try to measure the PV curve, the pressure volume curve of the helmet, you have two interesting findings. The first is that you need to leave a certain amount of PEEP, because otherwise you are going to deflate, and if I can see, okay, here it is. Deflate and reinflate the helmet, dissipating energy just to distend the helmet. So, very bad. This is a small size, and in this specific patient, the minimum patient, this is not a patient, this we nailed the helmet on a table. In this case was 5. I would suggest you never get down to below 7.5, 8 centimeters of water. But in addition, we measured the compliance, which was 50 ml per centimeters of water. Please note, this is a rough underestimation of the compliance, because in all honesty, we really nailed the helmet on a table. But the problem with the helmet is the cushion that moves. So if you keep it very tight, the patient is going to feel, discomfort. If you don't, the movement, the craniocaudal movement is going to be huge. So what happens when you ventilate with the helmet the patient, that you apply the pressure to the helmet, part of this pressure is dissipated because of the soft wall of the helmet, and what the patient really gets is this. And if you increase the pressure, you can partly solve the problem, as nicely shown by the paper by Vargas and co-worker. Anyway, if you have a compliance of the helmet that we assume to be 50 ml per centimeter of water, and we say that our patient has 50 as well, you end up in an overall compliance of 100, which screws up the time constant. Because you see, if with a resistance of 20 and a compliance of 0.05, my time constant is 1, if I double the compliance, the time constant is 2, which means that I need more time to exhale. And that's why, especially in COPD, you may have huge desynchronies like this, which are well documented in this study. To overcome this problem that is not only related to COPD patients, we tried NAVA, and this is the paper by Gian Maria Camarotta, where we look at a certain series of patients. We did a protocol pressure support, NAVA pressure support. This is the experimental record. You see huge asynchronies that are completely solved using NAVA. And this is the group mean data, where again, above the dotted line, you have the number of patients who had an asynchrony index above 10%. You remember the magic threshold by Thiel and co-worker. Now, beside this that was kind of expected, we also found something that was surprising. First of all, gas exchange were no different between pressure support and NAVA, which is okay. In terms of delays, with NAVA, they were definitely improved, especially the delay of the inspiratory trigger. And also, in the bottom line, you see that the time during which the patient and the ventilator were synchronous was significantly higher in NAVA as opposed to PSV, which means that you can guarantee more time of synchrony, and that is the reason why you decrease those wasted effort I showed you before. But what made us completely surprised is this data, that the electrical activity of the diaphragm was no different between pressure support and NAVA. And which is, in this case is 20, well, it's not crazy, but these patients were sucking. I mean, the respiratory rate was around 25, and we would have liked to be able to decrease it. And that's why we now trick the ventilator, and we don't use NAVA anymore in itself, but a modified NAVA that we call NAVA high, but it's something you can do yourself. It's not a big deal. So this is the pressure support, this is the NAVA conventional, and this is the and this is the NAVA modified. And you know that now we can effectively reduce the electrical activity of the diaphragm, and I can tell you that we have patient done. The group mean data are consistent, and all patient goes in the same manner. And indeed, we were able to maintain all the positive effects in terms of synchrony, and able also to decrease the electrical activity of the diaphragm, which is the neural effect. I showed you the limitation of the conventional helmet, but now, and here I have to disclose my conflict of interest because I'm having royalties out of this interface, 2%. Nothing, don't think but I think it's fair. I just want to show you this interface where we eliminated the bracelets, and that we are able with this, we have the first data coming out right now, to improve the pressurization rate. This is an IRDS patient. He's self-extubated. As you can see, the guy is sick. His sucking is very, very frequent in terms of breathing rate. And we were able to keep him outside the tube. And you see that there is no brace. I mean, there is this rigid collar that you can see outside is presented by the company, which is sponsoring this meeting as well. And the interesting is that the combination of NAVA and this type of interface is today probably kind of an interesting option, especially for those patients that need long time of NIV. And we use it a lot for prevention of post-extubation respiratory failure in those patients who already have the NAVA catheter inside. We don't put the catheter specifically for up to date. And I wish to thank you for your attention. Okay.